Cool. We are now recording. Awesome. Yeah, so we'll kind of start high level. We're actually go over some week 3, week 4. And honestly, per usual, y'all, if there is like any questions, anything that you have that you want to discuss, it doesn't necessarily have to do with at this point week 3 or week 4. It can deal with any of the weeks. If it is something that's in a lab that we technically haven't gotten to yet, we can try to answer that. I think I've maybe done one more lab ahead of this, but I still have a few more to go to get to the end. So um sometimes it's just hard to know everything if I haven't seen it yet. But maybe between all of us, we'll be able to kind of cover any questions people have. Please stop me from just talking. I will fill the silence. So there's no right or wrong time to kind of ask a question. Again, sort of same overview of where we're at. Um, yeah. So yeah, I'm counting this as week 3 and 4 since we spent last time with Vikram on BigQuery, which I thought was really interesting. I use BigQuery every day, and even I feel like learned. I did start recording. Thank you, Rich. Yes, because it's my choice right now says stop recording, which implies to me that I am physically recording. Um, yeah, seems that way. Yeah. So if hopefully that was useful to people. Um, Selfishly, it was useful to me. Again, I felt like I learned some stuff, and also I didn't have to talk for the entire time per usual. I like sharing the load. I like, especially with people who are, more experienced than I in a certain product. So it's best to learn from others. So I really enjoyed that. I'm not sure if I'll be able to add another person in the next 2 sessions, but if I can, I will. If I feel like there's something of value. And yeah, so that's where we're at. So we're kind of in streaming was last week, data flow, um, and some of the batch streaming. And then this week up to now was all the kind of smart analytics, both kind of the pre-built stuff as well as running things in their version of Jupyter notebooks, running pre-built code, kind of the whole 9 yards. So really, I think useful. In my mind, like this pathway kind of covers the surface of like machine learning and the analytics stuff, and really the professional machine learning engineer gets deeper into those algorithms. Although there are questions on the data engineering exam, as far as I've seen, that that do ask some basic like algorithmic questions. So if you're taking any practice exams or senior practice questions online, and there's an algorithm question, machine learning question, again, if you have any questions about the questions, particularly those, please share them in Slack or share them here if you have them already. Interestingly, like my background is more in analytics, machine learning, data science side of things and then I became kind of an engineer. So I do have like a lot more experience on some of like the mathematics of that. Although I would maybe have to brush up on some of the topics. So cool. Let's keep moving. The only big announcement I have this week is again GDG Atlanta, which is me, and Women Tech Makers. We're having our IWD event, International Women's Day event, this Wednesday. It's at Atlanta Track Club, which is if you are in Atlanta or you're familiar with the Atlanta metro area, it's in the area where Sweetwater Brewing is located. So kind of that like business district area. And so, yes, it's women and any women allies are welcome. We just ask that you RSVP. We'll have some light food and drinks and a guest speaker and then a panel discussion, which I will lead. So yeah, I'd love to see if any of y'all are local. I know a lot of people are not local in our group here, but if you are, please visit. On that note, if you're involved in GDG in any way and you're in Atlanta for any reason, I think it's called React is happening May or June. That's a big conference. There's some big events happening like May, June time that are actually being kind of stacked together. I believe like the first week in June. So if you happen to be coming to town for any of those things, please let me know. We can connect or maybe collab on an event. That would be awesome. Yeah, so that's where we're at. So we're just gonna jump right into it. Like I said, we'll go back a little bit, go over some week 3 stuff, and then we'll also go over some week 4 stuff. Week 3 had to do with kind of data processing pipelines, the storage associated with those pipelines, different analytics solutions, both with batch and streaming, and kind of the different infrastructure builds depending on use cases, types of data, amount of latency, the size of data, the type of analytics one would be doing. So yeah, not generally speaking, actually, really all of these tools, and this is sort of like, I feel like should be pretty obvious at this point, based on all of our previous sessions, is the tool really comes from what your application requires. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? So really depending on the type of data, how you'll be using that data, how much of that data, and how much transformation kind of dictates what's going to happen and what you'll need within the cloud platform, right? So you might just be extract and load. So for an example, you might just be hitting an API, grabbing the JSON object from an API and just storing it. Maybe you're storing metadata or something. Maybe you're going to get to it later. That will probably be grabbing from the API, storing it in in a bucket, right? In a cloud storage bucket. You might extend on that to then do some processing on that data to grab some information, parse some of the data from what you've pulled from the API and put it into tables. That will then probably usually involve BigQuery. At least in my experience, that's kind of the pathway we use for most of our batch load data. And then, but of course, if you have very large or sparse data, that might involve big tables, Bigtable, the actual product. And then there's also the transformation kind of in process, which is more using when we talk about using data flow, right? So, and then processing and then putting it into BigQuery, so to speak. So that would be more of like an ETL process. Cool. So there's different storage classes. I mentioned cloud storage. This is sort of the primary data store for all of GCP. It's unstructured data. Effectively, you can put just about any unstructured data in there. It's very cheap. But it's really just storage. There's no like analytics you can do on it. You really have to move the data to then be dealing with it kind of if you're going to be running a regular sort of analytics on it, things like that, you would not keep it in cloud storage. Bigtable is really for if you have much larger amounts of data that you want like low latency, need high scalability. But note that use of cloud Bigtable is much more expensive than using cloud storage. And then BigQuery is more like what I would call like a data warehouse. It acts as storage, but it's a storage and analytics solution, right? So your data lives there, but you can actively use it for analytics, pretty much using plain SQL language effectively. And so I don't know if this was in the rest of my slides, but one of the things really that makes sort of all these things very useful is that you end up in a situation where you can separate out your storage and your compute solutions, right? So that's really important to remember. So in cloud storage, you're paying for the storage. In BigQuery, you're paying for the like how much data you process. And I think Vikram showed this, and maybe I've pointed out in the past as well, that when you're in BigQuery, you can do like test runs, or even in like the top right corner of the UI, it will show you how much data will be will it have to look at effectively to run the SQL process that you've written. And so that will give you an idea of like the costs associated um, with that process, right? And so then you can kind of in the UI sort of make some changes and figure out how to get like that cost down, right? I think Vikram did a really good job of sort of showing like the difference if you did like a select all statement versus filtering your columns first versus partitioning data, and kind of how that sort of subsequently improves upon the efficiency and the costs of resource costs of the different calls. Cool. So yeah, I think I sort of touched on this a bit, but when kind of looking beyond sort of data flow, which is like the pulling, usually it can be used for batch or streaming. For us, we use it mostly for data coming in stream, processing, like cleaning up that data, processing it, and then putting it in a BigQuery table. Again, different versions of this might include like if you need very low latency, high throughput situation, use data flow and it will dump into Bigtable instead. If you are doing like a distributed process, like we're using a Spark pipeline, Cloud Data Proc instead of Data Flow would be your solution. And then if you're building something that people who are don't have as much like coding experience, maybe they're analysts who want to work just in a UI, then there's Cloud Data Fusion, which is a point and click kind of visual pipeline solution. So those are just this sort of understanding like these breakdowns of scenario and what products are best in those scenarios are how we're seeing like a lot of the questions really are asked. And I know I'm sure we'll have these conversations when we get into our questions, our example questions, and we talk about it every week. But the questions aren't super clear all the time, but the best way to look at it is like process of elimination and really like pinpoint like the key words like within the questions of that really indicate like some of these points, right? If they say something like you need very low latency, or they mention Spark, right? Like that should help you sort of process of elimination through the options. Yeah, and so this is what I mentioned in terms of the separation of compute and storage, where especially if you end up like with data proc, right, and you're running it, or data flow also it spins up a cluster. That cluster isn't permanent. It spins up only when that process is running. The storage of the data itself is separate from that. So once the process is done, the cluster shuts down, then you're not continuously paying for the cluster. So that's sort of the importance of having your like consistent storage separate from your actual cluster, your clusters in this case. Yeah, so these are some of the benefits of cloud storage. Again, this is like, these points are really good things to remember, just to put in your brain for questions, right? Like, what is cloud storage good for it? Okay, first of all, it's Hadoop compatible. So it's faster than the typical HDFS, the original sort of Hadoop processing, and then it requires less maintenance. You don't have to maintain the clusters. You can use it across the whole product, and it's very inexpensive, right? So remembering kind of these key points about all the different products really will help, again, have that tool set for using this in practice, of course, but also, like, practically speaking for us, using this knowledge in the exam. That's kind of what I've really started kind of honing into as I've gone through these weeks and, like, seen more and more questions, gone back to questions I've already seen, like when I have taken practice exams before I started any of this and did terribly. Now I can go back and kind of like, oh, I kind of understand how these questions are being asked and some of these points and how to kind of get a little closer to the answers. Uh, cool. And yeah, so I think this is more, some of this stuff I find like a little more advanced. I haven't seen too many questions that are particularly like this, although Hadoop and HDFS are mentioned. So I would just kind of remind yourself like some of the overarching similarities, differences, and where you would definitely maybe need to use one versus the other. But generally speaking, just knowing that cloud storage is Hadoop compatible and it's generally faster than HDFS in most cases is probably good enough. And then moving on to the topics in week 4, we looked at some of the pre-built ML models, deploying an actual ML pipeline, choosing some of the training and serving infrastructure, and then the measuring, monitoring, and troubleshooting of the machine learning models. Again, I think for me, most of these subjects covered in the professional data engineer like pathway in the exam are like, this is not, as what I've seen, is not a very high percentage of the topics. And what they do show is more high level than if you dig into the machine learning engineer program, which is really more about like building and improving upon these actual models in a more advanced way. But like, it's very important to understand this because as a data engineer, why are we building data pipelines? We're often building data pipelines to leverage for machine learning purposes. So we all kind of have to understand like where we're getting our data, how our data looks like, how we can build baseline data tables, often for our colleagues who are then the data scientists or machine learning engineers who kind of, there's like a handoff, right? And so that's very much like how it works in our organization, although we're trying to improve upon it. And not every org is the same, but they're generally, I'm seeing more of like actual separation of jobs and job descriptions that are like data engineer versus machine learning scientist or machine learning engineer. So for us, like the machine learning engineers are more building, they're trying to build like self-service ways to help data scientists take like what they build in maybe a Jupyter notebook and actually get that into production quicker, or help them build their test models in a notebook in a way that then the machine learning engineers can actually, pretty easily get that into production, right? So that there's some conversation happening there and consistency in how things are built so that there's a cleaner transfer. It's a really non-trivial problem, like all of these pieces. And it's super interesting. It's kind of why I ended up doing what I do, even though I came from analytics, statistics, data science, and then, I almost, in my day-to-day job, I don't really do any modeling anymore. I do strictly engineering of pipelines because over the years, like I found the more and more I've worked in machine learning and modeling, it's great in an academic and research context. But I always question, like, well, so now what? Like, or so what, right? Like, what are you going to do with that and how are you going to do it? And, a lot of times I feel like people think, oh, yeah, we're just going to build this model and then we can like put it into production. Like, no, like, how are you getting your data? What does your data look like? How are you going to maintain your data? Like, there's all these other questions. And, you can't really have a good machine learning model that you're using for in a product for customers unless you have access to high quality data, and then there's like a seamless transition for how you're going to use that data. How do you continuously train on that data? How do you know about you when how often do you need to retrain your data? Like, all of that stuff, to me, like, I don't know, some people may think it's not as interesting, but for me it's like Legos, and it's super valuable to making sure that all those models and algorithms actually produce things that are useful and non-harmful in my mind, right? So I may be tooting the data engineer like more, I'm biased, no pun or pun intended, but just from experience, that's kind of how I've ended up where I am, just because of all that. So yeah, that was an aside, but if you want to know more, please let me know. All right, so let's get into some questions. Again, we got Slido. I still find this the easiest way. Nobody's told me otherwise, so I'm going to keep doing it. So for those of you that want to be involved, you can join slido.com, use that PIN number. The question should be there. And I usually give a couple minutes per question for people to respond. I think on here I can see like how many people at the top right have responded. So I usually wait for most of people to respond, and then we show the answer and we talk about it if we need to. So I'm gonna drink some of my tea while I let you guys do that. Y'all do that. One person's responded. Two. Does it not work to go to Barnabas? Does it not work if you go to slido.com? Now I'm like, did I do it correctly? 1-882-808. I'm trying it myself. So yeah, I went to slido.com and entered that number and it got me there. So 1-882-808. Oh, I think I made this question incorrectly. It's okay. I know the correct answer, so it's fine. It looks like it's showing up as a poll instead of multiple choice. See. We shall see. Y'all get to see every week how very human I am. All right, I'm going to give like another 60 seconds. If anyone is still thinking about it or trying to get in, please let me know, whether in the chat or voice, whatever you're more comfortable with. I'll also remind people that if for whatever reason, if you aren't comfortable going to chat, you're not comfortable going on the mic, totally fine. There's also the option to DM me in the chat, so you can ask me the question directly. Or if you're on our Slack group, you can, DM me there as well. So, okay. We're gonna move on. So I've got about half. So, cool. I want to see. I think I made this question incorrectly. Cool. So yeah, I did do this as a poll, which isn't the correct format. However, most of the people answered seem to be on the right track. So the answer is use BigQuery for storage and select automatically detect in the schema section. So use BigQuery for storage and provide format files for data load, update the format files as needed. So you want the schema on these files or location change your analyst teams. I'm trying to think of how to answer why that's not. The schema of these files, location change your analyst teams. Right. So once you create a BigQuery, it's not both B and C. This is only one answer. Or maybe use link data as temporary, use cloud storage, link data as temporary tables in BigQuery and turn on. No, so temporary tables are good for like one-off analytics. If that's your plan, it would be really that would be a cheap solution. But if these are going to be consistently reused, then that is not an appropriate use case for the temporary tables. Yeah, so yeah, temporary tables are better in this scenario. There's other versions, other things that temporary tables, like if you have intermediary steps to something where you could use temporary tables. But in this case, using it, keeping your data in BigQuery and constantly pulling out a temporary table just for running these aggregates it's not the correct use. So why is this not a straightforward question? You said it's not phrased correctly. No. It is phrased correctly. I just created it in Slido as a poll instead of a multiple choice question. So it's just the format of the Slido. I'm sorry. The question is correct. Yeah. Me can't speak English. Yeah. So yeah. And then for the other one, use BigQuery, provide format files for data load. So yes, BigQuery is correct. The reason why you wouldn't use format files and then update the files as needed is if these are occasionally changing, occasionally or even regularly changing, you obviously don't want to have to manual update files. And BigQuery tables can't be updated once they're created technically. You actually recreate the table. So like once you create a schema on a table, you can't recreate the schema without recreating the whole table. So in this case, you would have a pipeline that runs that automatically detects the schema and runs the aggregate, right? So yeah. The schema is changed. I don't think you can change the schema on a table without recreating the table. I could be wrong. Somebody correct me, but I'm pretty sure. Because I'm almost positive I tried to do something like that in a composer DAG recently, and you had to create a replace. No, I mean that's the setting. Oh, the schema is changing, not the form. The schema of these files will occasionally change. Yeah, yeah. So, are you asking that as a question, Elena? Oh, yes. No, yes, because the schema is changing, not the format. That's why update the format as needed is not the right answer. Thank you. You even noticed something that, yes, more granular than I missed. So again, it comes down to reading is essential and process of elimination. So, yeah. Cool. All right, next question. Hopefully we can have less of my poor translation English services. So yeah, PubSub guarantee true or false? PubSub guarantees that messages delivered are in the order they were received. I'll wait another minute or so. Okie doke. So we got 8, which is about how many people answered last time. So I'll continue. If anyone wants me to slow down or anything, please let me know for the next question. Oh, y'all, this is decidedly false. Very, very, very false. So PubSub does not guarantee the order the messages are delivered at all. And that's why using windowing, which was part of that I think the week 3 material, was really important, like within Dataflow, because it helps ensure that you're not getting duplicates of the message, you're getting things in the correct order. I do have a link if you'd like to learn more about ordering of PubSub messages. I will also include these links in our Slack group after. So Babak says, BigQuery doc doesn't say adding columns to table require dropping and recreating. I guess it's just for other cases except adding columns. Ooh, good question. Adding columns. I'm trying to think. Does anyone else here have an experience with that? I'm trying to think if I feel like we do add columns, but the way we do our pipelines always assumes create and replace table. So we have backups of tables, and then we create and replace the net new table with the new schema. Okay. So you can actually just append the column. It was in one of those. Okay. Well, you can, but when you do that, is it still in the background? Is that still the same table, or has it actually created a new table? I have to think about that. Same table. Cool.
I don't know which one is the case for BigQuery, but for other databases, for instance, Postgres, you can add a column without
Okay.
dropping the table.
So then
Yeah.
actually, that's probably a good indicator. Yes, thank you, Lena. That would be great to share that, because BigQuery can actually connect to Postgres and MySQL databases. So I would assume some of those things would ideally be consistent. So yeah, I think that's probably a good indicator. But yeah, PubSub, I again sent the link for that, and again I'll share it in Slack. The messages are not guaranteed to arrive in any particular order. So that's where windowing comes in. So which of the following about PubSub is not true? Not true. So again, this is a good exercise in process of elimination. No. So windowing is basically like how you ensure that like you actually capture the message in the time that you expect. Yeah. I think that document that I sent probably can explain it better than my very poor yeah. So first of all, the question was that messages are guaranteed to PubSub guarantees that the messages arrive in order. So actually, the link I just sent you talks about using an ordering key to help enable messaging ordering, but it doesn't guarantee without using keys and or windowing that the messages will arrive in order. So windowing is about how you receive the messages. Yeah. I'm like I have all my like my own 3 screens open with all the different resources looking at. All right. When we get to about 8 responses, I will reveal the answer again. Anyone else? Anyone else? Bueller. Cool. Very good. Yeah. So the only thing that is not true is that PubSub stores your messages indefinitely until you request it. That is not true. Can anyone tell me how long PubSub will store your message if it's not acknowledged? Very good. 7 days. Excellent. So yes, if a message is not acknowledged by some subscriber, then yes, it is washed away in 7 days. Yeah, so PubSub connects applications and services through the messaging infrastructure. That is exactly what PubSub is. And then PubSub simplifies systems by removing the need for every component to speak to every other component in GCP. So that is a truth of PubSub. So basically, you can have a subscription, you can have different pieces of GCP, be subscribers to that subscription, so that when a message comes in, it kind of like activates sort of the processes connected to that subscription. So rather than having to physically like connect the different pieces, you have this one central like messaging service that everything else sort of belongs to, right? So that's kind of how that generally works. So yeah, doesn't store your messages indefinitely. Cool. You're designing storage for CSV files and using an IO-intensive custom Apache Spark transform as part of deploying a data pipeline on Google Cloud. You intend to use an ANSI SQL to run queries for analysts. How should you transform the input data? So again, the question is a little bit longer, but there's keywords that are really helpful. And then that process of elimination. How do people unmute themselves? I don't even. Let me check on you. Well, that's so weird, Elena. You don't have. Let me see if I can fix. Oh, no, where'd you go? Oh. You do look different in my attendees, so I don't see a little microphone or camera for you. What if I set you as a host? That'd be fun. Yeah, no. Did you RSVP from GDG page? Oh. Did you just go on? Yeah, okay. I just made you a. Did that work? I made you a host. Did it work? No, I don't think it did. This is so weird. Oh, Bevy is so annoying. I mean, it's convenient, but it is a little annoying. Elaine, if you can't figure it out, I'll add it to my list of questions to ask in the GDG leaders Slack space about Bevy. Okay, so we'll move on. So try Chrome or Google product. I use Chrome. That's just what I usually use. So yeah, when in doubt. Okay, let's get to this question. Okay, we've got pretty good parity so far. So yeah, great job, everyone. We're going to use BigQuery for storage, Dataproc to run the transformations. So your first key here was right in that first sentence is that we're using custom Apache Spark transforms. So immediately you can get it down to 2 that have Dataproc for the transform. So Dataproc is processing using Spark transformations. So you can already eliminate down to 2. And then then you intend to use SQL to run queries for your analysts. So you cannot run queries or SQL queries on cloud storage. SQL queries are on BigQuery. So you want to be storing your data in BigQuery. I have Linux, no Chrome for me. Huzzah to you for having Linux, man. I do really like Linux. Okay. So how many? I have a couple more. I think I have a couple more. Okay. Your company has data analysts and non-technical users, and you want to create data pipelines. Which is the best solution? Data analysts and non-technical users. I think the non-technical users piece is probably a better indicator here. Yeah, I feel I agree, Freddie. That's it's a very key keyword for this one. So I mean that comes down to when you get keywords like that, really just knowing the products, right? Knowing the names of the products and what's what. I can't remember. Pradeep, was it you who shared from the cloud certification blog, like the data engineering study sheet? I think I shared it reshared it in Slack. That same person, one of the links out was literally the Google Cloud Data Analytics cheat sheet, which kind of has like some of the main products, not all of them, a handful, and like a list of their defining features. I'm getting it right now. This person. Alrighty, moving on. Keyword, non-technical users. In this case, that would be Data Fusion. That is a point and click UI for creating data pipelines. Data flow requires code. I think specifically Python or JavaScript, probably. I usually use Python. I think JavaScript's the other one. So non-technical user probably will not be using that. Dataproc also is Spark. Non-technical user likely will not be using that either. So again, this comes down to really just knowing the products. Unfortunately, or fortunately, GCP products have lots of data in the word. So we use data flow in my job for some of our streaming, but I'm also building out our process for using data form, which is processing. It's embedded, or it will be embedded in BigQuery. It's not, I don't think it's publicly available yet. And it's like data flow, data form, like, oh God, it's very annoying. So yeah, even I like get confused, and I use them regularly. So I feel it. I think there's like 3 more questions. Cool. So there's 3 different ways you can create a Dataproc cluster. What are those 3 different ways? This might be a little more tricky for folks, but again, if you think about it and think about the things represented in these options, you can do some elimination as well. Yeah. But yeah, admittedly, so a question like this is less tricky if the more and more familiar you become with GCP, the UI. And I actually think I've done labs that have involved deploying things using all 3 of the correct answers. So kind of doing all the labs is helpful to kind of knowing some of these questions. Yeah, yes, there's so many labs and products. Sometimes you get mixed up. I agree. Like, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, even products I use, I find myself typing things in our Slack, in my work Slack, asking a question and having to go and like edit because I'm like, oh, just said data flow and I meant data form, and it's just like, oh gosh. So yeah, I very, very much feel the pain. Yeah. A minute or 2, wait for a couple more people. Yeah, Elena, I'm really sorry about your microphone situation. I will say there's 2 other people I suspect have the same situation, Eric and Ahiz. So I'm not really sure what it's related to or not. But yeah, you can keep pinging me in the chat if you have something. Again, I'm really sorry. Wish I knew. Cool. Alrighty. I'll try to connect from different. I mean, even if it's just an experiment, just to see that, so that we'll know. Otherwise, we'll just keep questioning. Cool. Let's see where we're at. Okay. So, looks like a lot of people got the correct answers. So the 3 correct answers are the 3 top answers here: Google Cloud Console and G Cloud, a YAML file, and Terraform configuration. So, does everyone know what Terraform is? You don't have to admit if you don't. I'll just tell you in case you don't. Terraform is infrastructure as a service. So it's literally creating infrastructure using code. It's actually really cool. It's cool on an enterprise level because it helps have some control over like building infrastructure, especially within cloud services, right? So we use it for creating tables. We use it a lot, mostly for creating permissions, service accounts, groups, things like that. It's just, and then you have like source version control on it, because we run it out of Git repository and deploy it that way. So we have version control over our infrastructure in code. So that's really cool. Unfortunately, not all of our infrastructure is represented in our Terraform scripts. It's something that has become a lot more active over the last couple of years for compliance, security, just consistency reasons as the organization has grown. So there's definitely legacy stuff hanging around that is not run that way. But like, for example, it is used very regularly, and I made a mistake when I came in. I was trying to get something to work in GCP. I was newer to the organization. I actually hadn't worked in a larger organization. I hadn't worked with Terraform before, was unaware, but I knew enough about GCP to be quote unquote dangerous in this situation. So I was like, oh, I see what's going on. My thing doesn't have permission to do this other thing. So I went into the UI and just kind of added the role to the SA I was using manually in the IAM, and very quickly got a Slack message from security. Was like, did you create blah blah blah? And I was like, oh, they're like, oh yeah, you're supposed to do that in Terraform. It's like, there are reasons for this. So yeah, I did that. It was an accident. Nobody was super mad. They just were like, okay, take it out and then do it the right way. It's like, okay, thanks. So, and then for those who answered Hadoop and Spark are open source frameworks for storing and processing very large amounts of data. They were developed by Apache. Hadoop was kind of like first wave, and Spark is newer. It's a little bit faster, uses slightly different methodology. But Hadoop and Spark, Hadoop particularly, really revolutionized computing by how it manages like shards of data and clustering of data. So you can run Spark pipelines in Dataproc on GCP, but those are frameworks. They're not actually tools for deploying infrastructure in this case. So that's now you know. And as G.I. Joe says, knowing is half the battle. Cool. Yes, Elena, and learning by mistakes. I learned by mistake a lot. So we should all be willing to make mistakes, educated mistakes, try your best, educated mistakes. not sloppy mistakes. Although arguably shoving IAM permission in GCP manually is arguably a sloppy mistake. Yeah. Paul, I'm sure you are very smart. I never took like a basic computer science class. So as I've sort of gone like in circles and sort of backfilled a lot of like my career like expertise, it's a lot of it has been out of kind of academic order because I didn't learn basic CS principles, right? And you kind of just sort of figure things out. You don't necessarily know the name for why or what you're doing. But when you do, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. But I think some of my learning has to do with that is, just some of the foundations in certain areas weren't built in the same way. And to be honest with you, so many people who are doing these roles are not much different than me, right? They're coming from all different backgrounds, academic backgrounds, professional backgrounds. So I feel like it's not that rare of a case, but a lot of these processes sometimes are built, with an assumption of like that knowledge base, right? So you can make seemingly silly mistakes just because you happen to not, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so that tends to, I think, happen. And yeah, so just know that it's okay and you will have learned some. Elena, I do have a CS degree, but I still have those problems and make those mistakes. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it happens. It's all good. Cool. Cool. More on PubSub. Push versus pull. Two of these are correct. So the push model sends a status 400 for the HTTP call. In the pull model, messages are stored for 7 days. The push model uses an HTTP input. The way the acknowledgement work is to ensure every message gets delivered at least twice. So 2 of these are correct. Give you another minute or so. Cool. Awesome. Great job. The poll model messages are stored for 7 days, which we've established. And the push model uses an HTTP endpoint, which I got correct when I answered this, but also I think technically it's supposed to use an HTTPS endpoint. Yeah, and 200 is for success, 400 is for error. So the sends 400 for the HTTP call that was successful, that would be incorrect because the 200 would be successful. And the acknowledgement to ensure every message is delivered twice. No, it's to ensure the message is not delivered more than once. So yes, because once a message is acknowledged by subscriber, then that message is done, right? So either it's acknowledged or it expires in 7 days, one or the other. Cool. So yeah, this I believe is actually the last question. So which of the following are different types of data flow windowing? And I will say for me, like I know the answer to this, but and I got it right when I took it myself, but windowing and some of the nuances of pub sub, that like whole lab. I mean, I've taken it, but I'd probably take it again because I think it's a little trickier, at least for me, like understanding the different windowing techniques and things like that. So, and how to write some of the data flow code for that. Maybe that's just me. I need to find somebody who will let me work at work on more streaming pipelines so I can get my hands on more of that because my day to day is almost exclusively in batch pipelines. Batch only, yeah. It's interesting because there's obviously so much going on in the space and data that streaming is streaming and then like edge computing, right? That's like definitely more and more things out there, but at the end of the day, like a lot of enterprise are really still the needs are really still very batch, right? Like just batch data, pretty standard, like structured batch data. Yes, is there swaths of unstructured data, streaming data that can be leveraged, and we're trying to, and there's so many different things that we could be building. Absolutely, and we're getting there. But I think there's something to be said about your standard batch processing. It's not going to go away. Yeah. Oh, okay. Guys answered that pretty quick. Grass is always greener on the other side of the grass. Yeah, no. Yeah, fixed, sessioned, and sliding. Yes. So you have fixed window sizes, certain length, session sizes, literally like the actual like session length, and then sliding. I think sliding is you have like a fixed size of the window, but then how often it like shifts, right? So over, it could be like 30 seconds with like moves every 5 seconds, right? So those are the 3 types of windows. Obviously, I need to practice more of that. Cool. So those are all the practice questions I did for today. And we're after 8 o'clock. So I feel like that's probably plenty. I will plan to share kind of any of the links that I sort of popped in the chat today. If anybody else has anything, I know some people shared other things, please share them in our Slack group. Now's the time. If there are any other questions that people have about what we've talked about what's coming up, about life in the universe, the answer is 42. Yeah, Elena, I'm really sorry you can't actually ask your question, but please ask the question in chat. Would you say that PubSub is only useful for streaming data, or could it be also helpful with batch pipelines? I'm trying to think of a situation when one would use PubSub for ingestion instead of a cloud function with a trigger for the storage update. When data arrives, yeah, like your example of just using a cloud function with a trigger, or I use Composer, Airflow, kind of, yeah. I think you kind of, that is sort of like the separation. PubSub decouples producer from consumer, right? Which is really the valuable part of why it's so important for streaming. I can't think of a case. Would you use it? What about, like, could you use PubSub to detect, like, if you wanted to kick off some process that was maybe batch, and you would use PubSub to detect a change, like in a table, and that's what kicked off the process? I think that could be a use case. We might actually be trying to figure something out exactly like that at my work. We've gone back and forth, and again, because I mumble jumble some of the products and there's lots of moving parts right now. But one, I'm trying to think. So I think that actually would be a use case. So you need a topic. Yeah, but if you have something, subscribe to the topic. It's an interesting question. I want to think more on it. It's a really good question. Generally speaking, yes, it's really meant for streaming, but I think it is like super powerful, and probably people aren't always making use of it when it could be used. So now I'm really curious. So I'm going to find out. On that note, though, just because you can figure out how to use something for something doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing to use. Your data says unbounded. Okay. With PubSub or any other message bus, your data set is unbounded versus the case where you know how much data needs. Yeah. Yeah. But does that have to be the case? Like, does the data set have to be unbounded? I'm writing it down. Just because I want to know what it might not be worth knowing, but I want to know for batch. Yeah, I mean, I think we're leaning on the end of like, yes, it really is a batch, really for batch systems, but yeah, it's a good question. Any other questions or thoughts? I'm pretty sure most, if not all of you, are not in Atlanta, but if you happen to be and you want to come to IWD on Wednesday, please let me know. That'd be great. Yeah, so it doesn't need to be, but the purpose is to scale as required while decoupling the producers and the consumers. Yeah. You can have multiple subscribers for a single subscription. Is that what you're asking? So yeah, you can have yeah, multiple subscribers can subscribe to a single topic, right? Where functions, yeah. Well, you're talking then cloud functions versus PubSub. No. Yeah. So yeah, we're talking about using one or the other. Could you use PubSub instead as a substitute? Yeah. Yeah, it's sounding like no-ish, certainly sounding like it's not the best use case. But I'm still curious about like just different use cases, so I'd probably poke around on that. Any other questions, comments? Invite link is not valid. Oh, let me send another one. I wonder why. Let me get on here really quick. Give me 1 second. Copy invite link. Have a great night, Elena. Try that. It looks to be about the same link. No, it's different. CT1. Yeah, it's different link. Thanks, Farang. Yeah, Babak, I agree. It's like one of those things you can use it in theory, but I think it's definitely not the greatest use case. Okay. Where did my page go? Oh, shit. I lost my window. There we go. Okay. Cool. Night, Paul. Yeah, we're pretty much at the end. Same thing. GDG Slack. More, let me know. Hopefully that Slack invite worked. Babak, have a great night. Thanks, everyone. Thanks as always for your patience and support. Any other questions, please add them in the Slack group. I will share the recording tomorrow. Good night. Start recording.